here's Brody Brazil.
You know, this is kind of a crazy part of life. I'll go back 4 weeks ago. Let's just say New Year's Day 2024. I had no clue that back then I'd soon be doing a State of Pro Sports in the state of Utah video. But here we are. And for very good reason. Right now, there seems to be a huge coordinated push to get more pro sports teams and leagues to Salt Lake City. And I fully realize that's not Salt Lake City. That's just the most beautiful Utah image I could come up with on Google. So I put it here in the presentation. Let's begin like this. Within the last 2 weeks, this is when things have really picked up. And I say this respectfully. In my mind, Salt Lake City has gone from a sleepy sports town to a place where a Major League Baseball team made an official visit to check things out. And there was an ownership group in Salt Lake City that made an official expansion request to the National Hockey League. Let me go back to that sleepy sports town comment for just a second. I realize some of you are watching this from Salt Lake City. You might find that offensive, like you're not a good sports town or a big sports town. It's not that. It's just that the Jazz have been the main thing, certainly not the only thing. We'll get to that in just a second. But it seemed like the scene in Utah and Salt Lake City was rather settled. And I understand that there's been population growth and more people and more interest and more business and more possibilities and opportunities. But you just didn't hear a lot from Salt Lake City like you have in the last 2 weeks. And like I said, the A's visit up there and their official request to the NHL kind of coinciding with what's going on with the Arizona Coyotes. More on that in a second. They seem to be capitalizing on certain opportunities and making their voice heard. But again, Salt Lake City has never been just the Jazz. A couple other franchises that are relatively new, but some that have been around for quite some time. Real Salt Lake of MLS, Real Monarchs of MLS Next Pro League, the Salt Lake Bees of Minor League Baseball, the Salt Lake City Stars, they're in the G League of the National Basketball Association, and the East Coast Hockey League's Utah Grizzlies. So not even college sports, but just at the professional ranks, they're actually pretty well covered in addition to the Utah Jazz, which have obviously been around for multiple decades. And that name Jazz, no, it never fit. They came from New Orleans, but they kept the name. So this wouldn't be the first time that maybe Salt Lake City would benefit from the relocation of an outside team. Yeah, it's not just the Jazz. Let's be very clear. When I said sleepy before, I just meant that not much was on the radar, but now it is. In large part, thanks to these two big groups, the Larry H. Miller Group, which includes former Jazz owners. They own car dealerships. They have a restaurant, an entertainment complex. They run an advertising agency. They've got a TV station. This is a big endeavor, let's say. The Larry H. Miller Group. They're also the big ones behind the development of Daybreak, which is where that new Salt Lake Bees minor league stadium is going to go that the A's were actually touring. It's supposed to open in 2025. So the Larry H. Miller Group, wheeling and dealing in Salt Lake City. And then there's also the Smith Entertainment Group. Ryan Smith and his wife are the ones behind that. Ryan sold Qualtrics with his family to SAP, I think a handful of years ago, for like $8 billion in cash. Ryan went on to go buy the Jazz and Delta Center and Real Salt Lake. That Smith Entertainment Group also runs a media group, including a radio network, et cetera, et cetera. So those two groups alone, and by the way, the Smith Entertainment Group bought the Jazz from the Larry H. Miller Group. So there is some familiarity there and some connections. These aren't necessarily, as far as I can understand, they're not competing groups. Those are collaborating groups. So you put their efforts and their resources together, and you certainly understand what they're capable of in Salt Lake City. It's also a town that is very much hoping to get the Winter Olympics back for 2034. They had it in the early 2000s. And this, according to the Salt Lake City Tribune, the Olympics are coming back as Salt Lake City has been named the preferred host for the 2034 Winter Games. The subheadline says, much would have to go wrong for the Olympics not to come to Utah after the Olympic Committee announcement. Again, obviously that has not been finalized, but they're a frontrunner. You'd have to think from North America or the United States that Salt Lake City could be adding the 2034 Winter Games. And that means, by the way, that there has to be a huge buildup of infrastructure and more venues and facilities. And right now, it's the Delta Center that hosts the NBA. They could temporarily take in a new NHL team, whether it's expansion or relocation. And obviously, there's space and land and resources to go build other venues. Baseball's not in the Winter Olympics, but you understand my point. They would have to expand their facilities. And the way to do that is by adding some pro sports teams if they really are serious about taking on the 2034 Winter Games. And there's a group up there that is specific to Major League Baseball and bringing it in. And I think that holds true for both the baseball and the hockey efforts. Like Big League Utah, I don't know that they're exactly saying this out loud, but it certainly seems like their interest is to take either an expansion big league team, which baseball has said they're interested in doing as soon as the A's and Rays are finalized and wherever they're going to land. Obviously, Nashville seems like a favorite out east. Who would be out west? I mean, Utah's got to be a front runner. So they'll take expansion, but it also feels, I don't know that they've said this, it also feels like they'd be up for relocation. They'll just take whatever's quicker. I didn't want to say easier, but they're trying to get to pro sports teams as soon as possible. And I'm not always saying that a group like Big League Utah is necessary for a city to get a new pro sports team, but you'd have to think it certainly does not hurt to have this level of organization and detail and connection and resources and influence. And even going back to the whole A's and Las Vegas relocation situation, this is something that Las Vegas never actually had. But Utah is a couple steps ahead in the game of actually doing such. And this is also a huge question, right? The Larry H. Miller Group, they put up 7 billboards the other day around Salt Lake City to say that Utah wants the A's. Now, again, this is not an A's video necessarily. This is more on the state of Utah, but it's interesting that we know the team made a visit to Utah to check out that new ballpark in Daybreak. The Miller Group put out that press release. They're the ones that put out that information. Now they're putting up these billboards, and I think I said earlier they do run an advertising agency, so it makes sense how easily they facilitated this, but that message is not 100% clear. Utah wants the A's in 2025 or temporarily, or Utah wants the A's permanently. Are they seeking that that's even an option right now, that Las Vegas is not guaranteed or Oakland is not on the table anymore? And that's the whole point of Utah with the NHL and Major League Baseball. They are super into this, super aggressive about this, and I'm not faulting them or making even a comment on that. I'm just saying you can see how they are kind of making a huge push. They're going in on trying to bring in Major League Baseball and the NHL. So again, Utah wants the A's, ... I feel like that's an incomplete sentence, but it kind of purposely leaves it wide open to interpretation. So that's the Miller Group. Let's go back to the Smith Group. And they put out this release a couple days ago. The Smith Entertainment Group, the parent company of the Utah Jazz, Delta Center, Real Salt Lake, the Utah Royals, and several other Utah-based sports and entertainment ventures, today announced that it has formally requested that the National Hockey League initiate an expansion process with the ultimate purpose of bringing an NHL franchise to Utah. SEG has also made clear its immediate ability to welcome an NHL team to Utah using Delta Center as an interim home for an NHL franchise. There's two big things there, which is, as I explained before, they're trying to get sports as soon as they can, in any way they can. Literally read the two underlying things there. Initiate the expansion process. Okay, that's one route. And by the way, I'll explain later, I'm not sure how exactly ready the NHL is to expand. They're already at 32 teams. I don't think they want 33 and to sit on that. I think they at least want 34, but even if they do 34, it's 17 in the East, 17 in the West. You've got those odd numbers that just don't seem to work perfectly like it is right now with 32 total teams, 8, 8, 8, 8, or 16 and 16. Anyway, I digress. But they either want to initiate the expansion process or they've made it clear that they have the immediate ability to welcome an NHL team, as in the Arizona Coyotes. I'm pointing here, but I should be pointing here. That's the Tempe Arena, which last May was officially voted down. And since then, almost a year later, the Coyotes do not have an ultimate destination or final plan or something they're moving forward with still. And there kind of has been a deadline set, not officially, at least publicly. A lot of people are expecting that by the end of February, maybe even the end of March, that could be the Coyotes' deadline to have something new set in motion or wrapped up for the NHL. Otherwise, by the end of this season, they may not be as protected in consideration of what their future is actually going to be. And I hate to speculate on that. I hate to influence what sounds like a rumor. I mean, we don't know, but it does sound like the NHL has said, we will give you the next couple months to figure this out. But I think they are frustrated that the Coyotes don't have what's next figured out. Anyway, but the point is, Salt Lake City, from their viewpoint, they're basically saying, hey, we want expansion. That's what we want to set in motion here. But, oh, by the way, we're also ready. There's a reason they say the immediate ability to welcome an NHL team to Utah. They are very specifically talking about the Coyotes, a.k.a. the Desert Dogs. The population in Utah. I should have made a fancier graph than this. I apologize. It's so boring. But you can see the trend. And forget the lineup to the 1960s and 80s and even 2000s. Look where it's gone from 2000 to 2024. A population of 3.4 million now, I guess, updated for this current month and starting in January of 2024. But the population, as I'm about to explain here, has skyrocketed in the state of Utah. It still ranks 30th overall in U.S. population from a state perspective, 3.3 or 4 million residents. You get it. It's kind of in that ballpark. But here's the main one. Utah has the highest percent increase in state population since 2010. So of the 50 states, none of them have grown as quickly as Utah has percentage-wise since 2010. It's a relatively big state, 85,000 square miles essentially, but 80% of the population is centered around the Wasatch Front. That's right, I said it. Now that I got it in the comments section, last video I was talking about Utah and the A's. I didn't know the exact pronunciation. I'll say it again, Wasatch Front. See, now I'm a Utah expert, Wasatch Front. It's just an intimidating word when you didn't know how to say it for the first time. To nail it like that, still pretty proud of myself. Anyway, I got to spend more time in Salt Lake City, clearly. But yeah, it just goes to show you that the state's population is heavily concentrated around Salt Lake City. Okay, so predictions here. In my honest opinion, I think Utah lands something in the next 3 years. And it could be sooner than that. When I say something, I mean either Major League Baseball or the National Hockey League or both. It could be a team literally right around the corner there, like landing on the spot, the Coyotes or the A's, even on a temporary basis, whatever. It's my feeling, and just the way I can see the tea leaves, Utah's going to land something. And they're probably going to hang on to something the way that they're built and with their ambitions. I see one of these two things, these two avenues working out for them, or maybe both. They obviously have the current land and space and money and influence and resources to see it all through. I go back to, by the way, Ryan Smith. He posted on Twitter, it's still called Twitter, about a week or 10 days ago. Oh, he just went out golfing with baseball commissioner Rob Manfred in Utah. Yeah. So you can understand that they're not playing around up there in Salt Lake City. They have the ability to connect and be considered, and I think something here along some line is going to work out. I know a lot of promises get made about this will happen and that will work and it'll all be fine. But in the case of Salt Lake City, I don't know that I need any of that. I can really see how things work there and how things will work there for these pro sports franchises. The Jazz have always had pretty good support, and you'd have to think with the excitement of either a brand new NHL team or some type of Major League Baseball situation that Salt Lake City would offer a lot of the resources that professional sports franchises need, even more pro sports franchises. And maybe in the same way that we thought about Phoenix one time as a market that was emerging in the Southwest desert. Well, now look at it. Baseball, basketball, hockey, football, they're one of the big four, and I realize those teams are all spread out in different regions, essentially, but they've got the big four in the greater Phoenix area. And I think Salt Lake City is kind of along those same lines of growth and possibility and opportunity. And let me just go back to the NHL. I kind of already made this point, but of all the leagues, like baseball is probably going to expand by 2. As for the NHL, they recently got to 32. And if they get to 33, they're obviously the only pro sports major league in the United States that's at 33 teams, let alone they'd probably have to get to 34, and eventually they'd want to get to 36. And I really don't see the NHL expanding within the next couple years. So if Salt Lake City really is serious about landing a team, and I hate to get into this game of stealing teams and making pitches and undercutting and all that stuff, but it does seem like Salt Lake City's best avenue would be to go fishing for Arizona. It does kind of seem like that is their most immediate move, and maybe that's why that press release was worded so carefully and so specifically. They want to start the expansion process, but they obviously realize that being a magnet for the Coyotes might be their best route. So yeah, Utah's push is definitely on for professional sports. And it's just kind of amazing. Again, I'll end the video the same way I started it. All of this has cropped up within the last 2 weeks. I mean, January 1st, I wouldn't have put much thought into, an NHL team is right around the corner for Salt Lake City, or that a Major League Baseball team is really considering and has a maybe really good chance of temporarily playing there. Maybe Salt Lake City and their ownership groups permanently want to attach to a team. That billboard was very upfront, but also not very specific in the same sense. Hey, you made it here to the end of the video. You know I appreciate that. Thumbs up down below. That'll help me and the channel. And if you're just watching this channel for the very first time, that's great. Make sure you subscribe so I can definitely see you back here next time.